Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I am really excited to have Sam Heninger on the show today, a fellow podcaster who has the Courage Coach for Executives podcast, and also, along with his wife, Miranda, leads amazing coaching programs for executives and high performers. Sam, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I was telling you a little bit, I'd love for you to unpack how you got into coaching, because I think it will be surprising to people. Most people don't go into coaching at the age that you're at, right? They maybe work in business, they try a few different things out, and then they say, okay, now I'm going to become a coach. But your story naturally leads, I think, to what you and your wife do at the programs that you put together and your podcast. So I'd love for you to get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So to start things off, I suppose, I decided to study psychology. I was always so interested in human behavior and what makes us different and why that's special and important. And as I studied that, I also had some experience and the privilege of working in the field of social work. I was working with at-risk youth, and I got to see how families that are less fortunate deal with many big challenges. And I found that as I developed my career and got to see people from all walks of life, especially as I ventured into consulting and private equity, that there are so many common elements of people overcoming challenges of wherever they came from or whatever was right in front of them, that there are common struggles, and it all comes down to how would you figure this problem out? And while mentorship is so important, ultimately everyone has to make their own choices. And that to me was such a big topic for me to explore. And so that naturally flowed into what I do now, which is helping CEOs, executives, their teams in processing what's in front of us. What are the opportunities? What are the obstacles? And how are we as individuals, and then together as a team, how are we going to solve these things and make the most and have the most fun? Because all of this is individual. But the thing I appreciate about coaching and psychology is that there are patterns that can help us navigate our way through these challenges and through these experiences. So for me, you mentioned I am a bit younger than a lot of my colleagues. I came to this after just a lot of very intense moments, I suppose, that led me towards coaching, because it can be in contrast to therapy or counseling in that it is present focused, it's future focused. We're not going to be digging into the past necessarily and dealing with mental disorders. That would be what a therapist would help you with. This to me has been hugely rewarding because I get to see people do more of what they love and make the most out of their life. And that has been a huge growing experience, not just for me, but for the people I help.
Absolutely. And which came first? Did you start the business, or did you say, I know I'm going to go into this field, but I'm going to start a podcast on it?
Yeah, the idea came first. When I was studying in my MBA program, I realized that there were a lot of my colleagues, because I took an executive MBA track, which meant I was among a bunch of mid-career professionals looking to make their next step. And I just saw a general attitude of people sacrificing time with family and just living an unbalanced life, not because necessarily they choose it, but because they think there's no way other than to live in an imbalanced way.
Yeah.
And while there is a lot to be said about maximizing your life and doing the things that matter most to you, I felt like there were a lot of guys, especially me, there were a lot of dads in the program that wished there was a better way, wish there was a way to spend more time with their family while succeeding and growing their career. And so that to me was a big impetus, a big inkling towards how I wanted to help and who. And then I struggled for 2 years trying to find my voice and market myself. And the podcast has really been much more in my lane than any other strategies I've tried. So I'm really excited to be growing that and to be reaching other communities.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love most about podcasting is we get to share our voices on other people's platforms and let them share their voices with our audiences as well. And I think it makes such a bigger impact on everybody. It's such a great way to connect. You mentioned, you went through some things as well. And I remember reading that, were you a foster? You and your wife were foster parents? Some kids? And You were also, and then you have your own kids. So you were dealing with all these things while trying to create business. And like you said, finding that balance, because we hear so often that you have to sacrifice your family, you have to sacrifice your time, you have to work 70, 80, 90 hours a week to make it. And I think that's really difficult because I'm a mom and I know how valuable that time is and how important it is to invest in the future of our kids and how they're going to grow up, right? How are they going to serve the world? How are they going to be great humans and make an impact? So it is hard to figure out which is more important. Do we financially resource and spend all this time over here so that we can provide these things for them? Or do we pour into this other side? And so these are some of the things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis that you were able to take from your own life, see in your classmates, and then say, okay, these are the kinds of people I need to help in my coaching.
Absolutely. And speaking just from my own life, right now, I got young kids at home.
Yeah.
And just a couple of weeks ago, our oldest, he started preschool. And so he's in school 4 days a week. And he's taking to it a lot easier than I am. I am used to him being home for, better or worse. I'm just used to that. And it's reminding me, bringing up all these memories of the good, bad, and ugly that I experienced at his age. And so it's been a really rewarding experience because I've been able over the last few years, because of what my wife Miranda and I have chosen to make for our lives. And of course, we're responding to challenges and growth opportunities along the way. But I've been able to be there with my young kids more than most, I would say.
Yeah.
And I do that with the knowledge that, it may be a little tight right now. It may be a bit of a struggle, a bit longer than if I were just out of the house working 12 hours a day. And many people don't have a choice in that, which is unfortunate. And we want to change that if they choose. But I also understand in some ways life is long and there is always going to be work. So if I can hold out until I'm an empty nester and then really get going, then that's okay with me.
Yeah, it's interesting because of society, right? We always think about the moms who have to go to work or moms who are single moms, but we don't as much emphasize the father's role in their children's lives. And fathers don't just want to go to work and have to be grinding it out all the time. They also want to be able to be there for their families and find that balance.
Absolutely. And I think the way technology and attitudes are developing, I think it's becoming more common for dads to be more involved or want to be at least. And I would say just on this point, it's really challenging sometimes because I come from a very family-oriented and traditional upbringing. And so I value the idea of dad being the provider. And so balancing those things between, am I giving enough? Am I giving enough to the work so that the material needs of my kids are provided for? But am I also giving enough so that the emotional needs are provided for as well? And so this has always been an undercurrent in what I do. I don't necessarily dive into all of this with clients because it's a lot more personal than say, hey, let's help you just be a higher performer.
Yeah.
But this is definitely at the heart of what my experience has been and what I see others struggle with.
Yeah. Well, it makes you much more empathetic too, and come up with those lines of inquiry when you're working with your clients. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what was getting your first client like?
Getting my first client, it's funny because as we talk about differences between people, personalities, temperaments, I came to learn in my experience just like as a independent, self-employed guy, that there's plenty of strategies out there to fill your sales pipeline, but you have to figure out a way that works for you.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a lot of people that weren't like me. It may have worked for them, but it was burning me out trying to replicate their process. And so for me, what ended up really working was, I suppose it's fair to say that I'm fairly introverted. I have lots of long-standing, deep relationships, but in a smaller, tighter-knit group. And so as I got out of my shell, realized that, okay, it may look embarrassing for me to start trying these things out and sharing with the people I actually care about. Like, yeah, I'm trying this out. Who do you know? Things like that.
Yeah.
I studied in Utah for both of my degrees, and there can be a culture out there of taking advantage of personal relationships to do sales and things like that. And so I've always felt very wary of trying those things out. But getting my first client was like just a miracle fell in my lap. It was just somebody knew somebody and was able to make that connection. And that's really all that it ever is. It's just about building connections and real relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, obviously this podcast is Your Brand Amplified. So I love talking about that entrepreneurship journey, who you are as a brand and a person, because you bring something unique to what you do. But also the point that you mentioned that there are so many things that we're told you have to do it this way. Here's how you create your funnel. Here's how you send out your emails. You need to create a group here. You need to post this kind of content. And it doesn't necessarily work. Like you said, it has to feel authentic. And you might need to step a little bit out of your comfort zone and try those other things. I would never have known that you're an introvert before you told me that. But marketing and sales is not one size fits all. Sure, there are certain things that will work, but you have to tailor them to who you are in your business so that you feel comfortable then stepping out of your comfort zone and trying one more tactic and one more over here and seeing what works for you.
Absolutely. And one thing I really appreciate about having been certified with Gallup for the Clifton Strengths assessment, which is an assessment that lots of Fortune 500 companies use, pretty well known, but it assesses, and there's a lot of data science behind this, it assesses where your natural talents are. And in comparison to other types of talents, there are some that we wouldn't say are opposites, but just not as likely to show up together. And so when we look at each person's unique makeup of not only what they're talented at, but what they enjoy doing, we find that you're going to have blind spots. You're going to have hurdles that you need to cross in developing your business or developing your career, whatever it might be. But the instances where you grow the most are where you are applying your talents. You're playing to your strengths. And it's when you do that may still be challenging. It may still be a lot of work. I'm putting in lots of hours these days because there's so much work to do, but it's rewarding and it doesn't lead to burnout because it's playing to my strengths. And I think a lot of times mistake the grind, well, this is just the price of success, when in reality, you may just be playing to your weaknesses.
That's such a good point. So talk about the Clifton Strengths testing. Is that something you use? Like when people want to work with you, does it usually start with that process? You have a questionnaire, maybe you have a few things that you do, and then you find out their goals, and then you're able to see where you want to go from there? Or is it different for each person?
No, I would say there's a pretty standard path that leads to a lot of really cool conversations where, we will discuss where are you at? Where do you want to go? Just get those bearings, those milestones, that horizon. And we'll use the assessment, which I forget how many questions, but it takes about 40 minutes to complete. You'll get your results. And it's funny, every time I speak to someone, so there are 34 identified themes.
Okay.
And your top 10 are the ones that you really want to focus on because they will be the ones that give you the most energy, give you the most bang for your buck when you exercise them. The funny thing is that every time I have someone sit down and look through their report for the first time, it tends to be that number one is, yes, of course, obviously, that's me. Like, there's no question. Every single word in that page is me. By the time we get to like number 4, they're like, actually, I feel like I'm not this at all. Or I feel like this is a weakness of mine. And so we start getting these different conversations where people often over-rely on certain themes of theirs. And then because of external circumstances, internal circumstances, they may actually turn the volume down on other themes.
Wow.
And so it opens up all these different conversations to why they might be feeling stressed out because, well, for one, they think what's an actual strength of theirs, they think it's a weakness. So of course they're getting more stressed out than usual.
Interesting.
And so it helps unravel these things.
Yeah, and you're right. That's a very different kind of conversation then, because I think we all feel like we know our strengths, or what brings us joy. But then sometimes we try other things and we're like, oh, but I like this too. And then you find out you're actually good at it. But data is really important in this, the science behind what you're doing, along with the emotional side.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, one thing I appreciate Gallup for is that they're conducting their own big projects for major clients as well. And so they have to have all those numbers to back it up.
Right.
Otherwise, they aren't closing those deals. And so I appreciate all the work that they've done to make this as hard and practical as they can.
Yeah. Can you share an aha moment that a client had with us that helped them change, either realize they were on the right path or go, oh gosh, I got to do some course corrections here to be that higher performer, to find more joy in my life and get to where they wanted to go?
Yeah. The one that's coming to mind for me right now is I was talking with the CEO and he was feeling under a lot of pressure at the time. He was working with the board, managing a lot of expectations where they were starting to feel more pessimistic, even more risk averse than boards can be. And he was feeling so bad because he was being asked even more of his team than he already was. And so trying to manage all of these different feelings, he, in the course of our conversation, just in being able to have someone he could speak freely with this about, it allowed him to come to his own answer, which was, I can do this. I have the courage to weather this little bit of the storm. I know that there's an end date to all of this trouble. And so just being in conversation with a coach allowed him to, I wouldn't say I was just there like he was talking to a brick wall.
Right.
But having someone that can listen and allow them the space to not interject, well, here's what I think, and, oh, have you thought about this? It's giving them a safe place to talk about the things that are really worrying them that they wouldn't necessarily be able to even go to their spouse or some other trusted person because there's not that understanding or knowledge.
Yeah.
So that was a big aha for him, that he could use that kind of conversation regularly.
Yeah. Are you ready to take your brand to new heights? Join the Brand Amplifier for Entrepreneurs program. Learn how to build, elevate, and amplify your brand with a comprehensive 10-module course. Learn more about it and other ways to implement our strategies at fullcapacitymarketing.com. Click on EFCM Learning Hub for more information. Can't wait to help you amplify your brand. And then did you find out what happened after that? Did everybody else get on board to do the more that they were being asked of? Was the board happy?
Yeah, I'll say that it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
And so this example was fairly recent. But what I'll say in terms of how these things tend to go is when something is really weighing on your mind, it may just be for that time. It may just be for that moment.
Okay.
And it's going to pass. And you may even know that. You may even know that, wow, this is just a bad day. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still a really bad day. And so having someone there is just what you need in that moment. Yeah. So in some ways, coaching is just that on-demand friend to listen to you.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not to make it sound transactional, but I say it to mean that coaches are there to grow with you. And so if it's one thing, one day, a couple months from now, it's going to be a different thing. And they're there for that too.
Yeah. And what does coaching usually look like when somebody works with you? Is it once a month? Is it every week? Is it months, years?
Yeah. So the way I suppose quite a few people do it is on a weekly basis. What I've found is people got busy lives. And working every other week tends to be optimal for most people. On the other end of that, though, I would say any less frequent, things just change too much. And so if we meet every 3 weeks or every month, then it's just not enough touch points. We spend the entire hour just catching each other up on what's going on. And so working on a every other week kind of basis. And one thing I've said on my podcast a number of times in terms of, because people talk about coaching in terms of project length and scope and all of that. Right. What I like to say is, while some people may offer, say, like a 3-week introductory program, I see that actually in the opposite way, that if you want to engage with a coach, or with me specifically, for 3 months, that means you have something very tightly defined and you have the resources to give a ton of energy toward it. You want to get a year's worth of work done in 3 months. For most people working for a year, that gives them enough time to breathe and be the busy person that they are, but still get the results from coaching that they're looking for.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you ever had to fire a client because they weren't getting out of it? You know, you could kind of see a path, but they weren't responding well, or they had too many hangups and they weren't willing to look past them?
I think that does happen quite a bit. I know, yeah, it has happened for me. And I just mentioned how people are busy
Mm-hmm.
and being committed to a coaching relationship, it does take
Mm-hmm.
resources. It's an investment
Right.
in your time and in your energy, your attention. And so when people sign up they like the idea of it, but in the end, it's not actually a priority, then
Okay.
unfortunately things can fizzle. And then you just have to have an honest conversation. Say, we defined a path to return on investment,
Mhm.
but where the importance is in your life right now, it doesn't seem like we'll reach that.
Yeah. I love the way that you phrased that.
Mm.
Very TC and gentle.
We can be very diplomatic. Yeah.
Yeah. And you co-founded the business and the podcast with your wife.
Mm.
And I am sure there had to be a lot of intentionality and conversations going into, we're creating this together as a family business. Yeah. So do you find that there are any tips and tricks that you could give to people who are thinking about going into business with their spouse or other family members?
Sure. So I'll say, as it stands right now with Miranda and I, yeah, we're listed as co-founders, and I am the head coach. I'm the main guy. I'm the face and voice of the podcast, though we do have regular joint conversations for episodes. In fact, the first season we produced was us having conversations about each other's personal core values, just to set the stage for things. What I've found is that it takes, I wouldn't say constant, but regular readjustment and communication.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll say, for instance, one challenge that we've had to talk about and still do to some extent, we've defined a path to solve it, but I have a number of certifications, qualifications, experience as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
where she doesn't yet.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to contribute and be a part of that and have a voice, and I want her to feel confident in sharing her voice and being someone that people can trust and have as a coach.
Yeah.
But understanding that there's going to be a division of labor and the business is going to grow with us, so that there's going to be different opportunities for us to take up different projects, different functions within the business.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it requires creativity, openness. You got to be willing to take a step back and ask yourself, I want my wife to feel included, to feel like she's really contributing, not just in the business on paper. I want her to feel like she's really making a difference. How can I help her? How can I help her feel that contribution?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can talk about that and come to a solution. So it's just living in the fast lane.
Yeah. Pivots, communication, changes in roles on who's doing which aspects of the business sometimes. Sounds like.
Right. Yeah. Because things will grow and shift as each of you grow and shift.
Yeah. What has been one of your, besides having it be a great marketing tool, one of your other favorite things about having your podcast?
Yeah, I'll say, so in contrast to the couple years that I've tried other forms of marketing, I'd say I had this desire to share my voice, mm-hmm. to be an inspiration to others, to be of service to others, and to push back on maybe some attitudes that I see out there that are really popular that I don't think are healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And before the podcast, I had whoever could find the posts that I would put up on social media, which wasn't many. And with the podcast now, suddenly, instead of asking whoever I could to get on their platform, I now have a platform to share for others.
Yeah.
And I found, again, every time, as an introvert, I found every time I felt the inclination to reconnect with someone I hadn't talked to in a long time. I, in fact, reconnected with a handful of friends from high school that I hadn't spoken to since high school. And in every instance, they were immensely appreciative for the opportunity to reconnect.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who want to talk. And the mistake I made was asking myself instead the wrong question of who would want to talk to me.
Oh.
And it's so easy to downplay ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? There are lots of people who like to talk. And so inviting them on has been wonderful.
Amazing.
In fact, being able to shine a spotlight on the topic of age diversity has been a huge rewarding experience for me, talking to authors and researchers about it.
Mm, I think that's so important. People want to be heard, right?
Mm.
You want to be seen and feel valued. And so, what I hear you saying is that you change the conversation from thinking about you to it's not about you, it's about the value that you and your guests can collectively bring to others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And being able to invite someone onto my show just sparks more conversations, more connections, and people like being able to talk about the things that matter. And people love to listen to people who are passionate about interesting things.
Yeah. And I think that the pursuit of purpose and meaning in work and not feeling that angst over work is something that everybody can identify wherever you are in your career, whether you are that CEO or executive that you normally work with, or somebody who's just setting out on that path.
Mm,
So, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's so important. I love it. I love the conversations I get to have. And I feel like I always learn something from each of my guests. And I get to take away some perspective that is something I've already been thinking about and need to research or investigate a little more in my own life. So
Mm,
it's funny because I've been thinking about a lot about like, what does that balance look like? And how do I make sure I'm juggling all these things and making sure that I have
mm,
time for my family and my pets and my work and volunteering and all the other things that are important. So again, right conversation at the right time for me too,
yeah.
not just my listeners.
Yeah. Well, and I'll share with you, this is something I talk a lot about with each of my clients, that if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like there's not enough time in the day, you don't have enough energy in the week, identifying and practicing playing to your strengths is going to free up bandwidth. It's going to give you time back. It's going to give you energy back so that you can put more into the things that you love. You've run out of time because you're doing the things that wear you down.
Yeah. Yeah. That's for sure. Now, beyond one-on-one coaching, do you see yourself expanding to group coaching, courses, other things in the future?
Yeah, so the roadmap I see for myself. So the one-on-one coaching is definitely the main thing.
Mhm.
I add to it to create a more comprehensive project
Mhm.
is to help with teams as well, do team trainings,
Nice.
especially on this topic of strength, the topic of
Mhm.
age diversity. And as these things grow, I'm increasingly getting the same questions asked. So those are going to be turned into courses over time. And speaking, retreats, these are all things on my mind to grow because I want to connect with people. I want to be of service to them. And that's what coaching lends itself to.
Mm-hmm. And since you started coaching kind of during the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's primarily virtual. Do you do some virtual, some in person? What does that look like for you?
It's actually been mostly virtual.
Mhm.
And I've been fortunate in that sense. And I think a lot of people have been fortunate in the sense that it's become more normalized,
Mhm.
that people are getting more practice in being okay with the virtual format
Right.
and realizing we still can connect. Perhaps it will never be quite as connecting as face to face, but in other ways, I get to be in my own space and I get to connect with you. And so perhaps that's safer in some instances
Mm,
than having to be
interesting.
in a public space, a public environment where I wouldn't feel as open necessarily.
Yeah.
So all of it's been mostly virtual and it's worked out.
Awesome. And what is the easiest way for people to connect with you to find out more about your services? Obviously, we'll put your website in the show notes as well as the podcast link. But do you prefer for them to reach out via the website, LinkedIn, follow you on socials?
Yeah, so follow me on LinkedIn. Just connect with me there, Sam Heninger MBA. And with the podcast, I have gotten far enough into this whole process that I'm producing clips. So you can find me on a lot of different social, YouTube, TikTok. That's where I am mostly. And then, of course, the podcast. I'm putting out several episodes a week.
Wow. I commend you for that. I know it is not an easy feat.
Yeah, I'm going pretty hard for a season, but it's
Um,
there to be of service to others.
yeah. And Sam, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse that you'd like to share with us today?
The one that comes to mind, and this is something that Miranda and I have tried to live by
Mhm.
for the couple of years that we've been aware of this little mantra, and it's there's nothing too big to forgive, and there's nothing too small to celebrate.
Oh,
And by that, I mean there, of course, may be very big hurts in your life. And I don't mean to downplay them or anything like that. They can be very big and they may take a long time to heal from. But I would rather operate from a place where I believe everything can be forgiven if the work is done to reach that. And on the other side, I've often downplayed my own accomplishments to the point where I don't feel like I've done anything of value. So for me, it's been very important to remind myself that every little step, every little inch that you take towards the person you want to be, even if there are backslides, there are going to be days where that happens, but there's nothing too small to celebrate, nothing too small to be grateful for. And that has helped me a lot.
That's fantastic. Sam, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I love learning about you and Miranda's company, how you started it, what you do, how you walk people through the coaching process, because there are a lot of coaches out there and everybody has a slightly different process. So it's important for people to figure out who's the right coach for them, where they are, right? Just like you want to find your ideal clients. So hopefully some of them are listening today. And again, I'll put all your information in the show notes. And thank you to the audience for listening to another episode and hearing another brand story from an amazing entrepreneur who's really pouring good back into the world and trying to make a difference in all of our crazy, busy, stressful lives to find those moments of peace and clarity. And with that, I'll be back again in a few days with another amazing expert. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.